we're going to have our fourth and final speaker for the evening, Mr. Scott Brown, who will be doing his first speech from the storytelling manual, The Folktale. Mr. Scott Brown, The Monkey's Paw. The Monkey's Paw, Mr. Scott Brown.
Do we have video? It was cold and wet outside in late October of 1902. But inside the white parlor, the blinds were drawn and the fire was burning bright. The old man was sparring with his son across from the chessboard, while his wife sat on the couch knitting. After a moment, Herbert White looked outside and said, "Hey, there he is." The gate clanked and heavy, wet footsteps approached the door. Mr. White got to his feet to greet the guest and returned to the parlor, followed by a tall, burly man with a shaggy, matted beard. "Sergeant Morris," he said, introducing him. The sergeant shook hands with the family and sat down by the fireplace as his host offered him a glass of whiskey. 3 glasses in, he began to speak about tales from the war, brave deeds, plagues, foreign people. 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding to his son and wife. "You know, I'd like to see India myself someday. Check out some of these old temples, priests, jugglers. What was it you were telling me the other day, Morris, about some monkey's paw?" The smile died from the soldier's face. "Nothing worth hearing," he said. "Monkey's paw?" asked Mrs. White. "What's that?" The soldier, obliging, took a small paw out of his jacket. "At first glance, it's just an ordinary paw," he said. "But it was cursed by an ancient Hindu priest. He wanted to show that men's lives are ruled by fate, and that those who tried to interfere with it did so to their sorrow. He put a spell on the paw, so that 3 separate men could get 3 wishes from it." The White family chuckled nervously, but the soldier wasn't laughing. "Well, why don't you have 3 then?" Herbert said cheerfully. "I have." "And did your wishes really come true?" asked Mrs. White. "They did." Well, has anybody else wished with the paw?" she inquired. "Aye, the first man had his 3 wishes. I don't know what the first 2 were for, but the third was for death." A grave silence fell over the room. Mr. White asked, "Well, if you've had your 3 wishes, it's no use to you. What do you keep it for?" The soldier looked at the paw for a moment and then tossed it casually into the fire. "Whoa!" Mr. White leapt up with a shout and grabbed the paw from the flames. "Better to let it burn," said the soldier. But the old man shook his head and put the paw in his pocket, and then gestured. The family all sat down to supper, and as they began their dinner chatter, the subject of the monkey's paw was partly forgotten. The 3 were entertained by another round of the soldiers' stories from India. As the candles waned to their final inch, Mr. White got up and showed his friend to the door. Returning to the kitchen, he found his wife stacking some dirty plates. "Oh, good, you're back, dear," she said. "There are a lot of plates here. Would you mind wishing me an extra pair of arms?" Herbert burst into laughter, but Mr. White took the paw from his jacket pocket and just stared at it. "I don't know what to wish for," he said lightly. "Seems to me I got all I want." "Why don't you wish for a couple $1,000 to pay off your mortgage?" suggested the son. "That would make you happy, right?" Smiling at his own credulity and humoring his son, the old man lifted the paw and spoke into it. "I wish for $2,000. "Whoa!" He dropped the paw and stared in horror. "It moved!" "Well, I don't see any money," said Herbert, "and I don't think I ever will." "You must have imagined it, dear," said the wife. "Come on, let's go to bed." The next morning, Herbert was joking lightly about There's his father's naivety in the morning sun. What a silly prank, said the wife. I mean, how could a monkey's paw grant wishes? And how could $2,000 hurt you, even if it could? Maybe, said Herbert, it'll fall on his head, hit him from the sky. Or maybe, said the wife, joining in, you'll become a mean, greedy old man and we'll have to disown you. The old man chuckled. But for what it's worth, I swear it moved, he said. The son got up from the table and said, well, I've got to go to the factory, but don't spend that money before I get home. And the old couple watched their son walk down the windy road towards the factory. A few hours later, there was a knock on the door. The old man went to the front door, greeted the guest, and invited him into the kitchen. The well-dressed stranger paced around nervously and finally said, I was sent here. I'm from Ma and Megan's. The wife started. Ma and Megan's? Is something the matter? Is it Herbert? What happened? Is he hurt? The man bowed his head. He's hurt, but he's not in any pain. Oh, thank God, said the woman. Thank God for that. But she broke off as the horrible realization dawned upon her. And her fears were confirmed in the stranger's averted gaze. He was caught in the machinery, the man said. There was nothing we could do. Mr. White stared out the window. He was the last one left to us. The stranger continued. I came to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all liability. They accept no responsibility for the incident. However, in consideration of your son's services to the firm, they wish to give you a sum as compensation. The old man rose to his feet and stared in horror at the stranger. How much? It's $2,000. The old couple buried their son in a cemetery some 3 miles away from their house and returned to a home that was steeped in shadow and silence. Days passed. Some days, they didn't exchange a word. They had nothing to talk about, and their days were long with weariness. Some 1 week after the funeral, the old man was tossing and turning in bed, trying to expel the horrible image of his son's mangled body from his mind, when he awoke with a start. The paw! His wife was screaming, the paw! What? Where is it? What's the matter? Where is it? You haven't destroyed it. No, it's down in the parlor. Why? I've only just thought of it. Why haven't I thought of it before? Why hadn't you thought of it? Thought of what? The other 2 wishes. We've only had one. He stared at her. Was one not enough? No, she said triumphantly. Go down and get the paw. We'll have one more wish. Wish our boy alive again. Good God, you're mad, he said, getting up. Get back to bed. You don't know what you're saying. We've had one wish. Why not another one? It's a coincidence, he stammered. Go and get it and wish, she said, shivering with excitement. The old man struck a match and lit the candle next to the bed and turned to his wife. He's been dead 10 days. And his body, I could only recognize it from the clothing. If you couldn't look at it at the funeral, how could you now? She dragged her husband from the bed. Get my boy back! Do you think that I fear the child that I've nursed? Taking him in his hand down to the parlor, with a candle in her other, she grabbed the monkey's paw and shoved it into her husband's hand. Wish! She said. Her eyes were alight. Her face looked unnatural and hysterical. He was afraid of her. It's foolish and wicked. Wish! He raised the paw to his face. I wish my son alive again. And he dropped it to the floor. Trembling, he sank back into his chair as his wife moved to the window and opened the blinds. They stayed there for some time, until the candle flickered out. Feeling an unspeakable sense of relief that the talisman had failed, the old man crept back into bed. A minute later, his wife came behind him. They lay there, unspeaking, for a long time, listening to the ticking of the clock. A squeaky mouse ran through the walls. After a long time of screwing up the courage, the old man struck a match and went downstairs to fetch a candle. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he heard a noise. A knock. So quiet it was almost inaudible. He dropped the box of matches and they spilled everywhere, and waited with bated breath. And then he heard another knock. The man turned and fled to his room, closing the door behind him, and his wife woke with a start. What was that? A rat, he insisted. A rat. I passed it on the stairs. She stood up, listening. He's here! It's Herbert, it's my boy! The old man caught her by the arm before she got to the door. For God's sake, don't let it in! It's my son! Are you afraid of your own son? Herbert, I'm coming! I'll be right down! With a wild retch, she broke free from her husband and fled from the room. He hurried down the stairs and dove into the parlor. He could hear the sound of the chain rattling on the door, followed by the panting, frenzied sound of his wife. I can't reach it! The bolt! Come here, dear! But her husband was on all fours, groping around the parlor floor, searching madly for the monkey's paw. He heard the scraping of a chair as his wife pulled it up against the door, and a frenzied series of knocks. He heard the bolt slide slowly back, and in that moment, he found the paw and made his final wish. The old woman opened the door and let out a moan of despair. Across, the street lamp flickered and illuminated the road, quiet and deserted. Madam Postmaster.